Hey, how's it? So today I'm going to be talking about Gemsquash. I've grown Gemsquash now for about 2 seasons, and this last season I've harvested some very nice fruit off here. I will also just quickly mention now, I will be referring to Gemsquash as fruit throughout the whole video because I've already recorded the video, and technically they're fruit, but you know, culinarily speaking they're veggies. So yeah, if you're gonna cook them, they're veggies. Horticulturally speaking, they're fruit. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about Gemsquash. I will be taking the same format as what I did with the corn, where I'll basically discuss what have I done, what issues have I faced, what have I learned, and what am I doing going forward. The biggest issue that I faced in this is really just powdery mildew, spacing, and that can all be resolved with trellising. So if you want to hear my thoughts and learn a little bit about this interesting veggie, yeah, stay tuned and let's get into the video. This is essentially my squash patch, one of them, one of 2. So like I said, I have had 2 seasons now where I've grown Gemsquash and butternut. But we're just going to focus on the Gemsquash today. So initially, and in fact not just initially, even this season, so now 2 years, I have technically planted the Gemsquash, but what actually happened is most of it grew from scraps. Initially there wasn't much going on here. This bed was existing when I first started gardening, but yeah, it was pretty much barren. There was no mulch. It was just a barren wasteland of depression. So what I knew that I wanted to do, I wanted to start a herb garden, and just needing some place to grow everything, I decided that I would grow everything here. So in preparation for that, I buried a whole ton of scraps here. The plan wasn't to grow squash, it just sort of happened. Everything grew from here, everything this was the point of origin. Again, funnily enough, the same thing happened this season. Yeah, so I buried all the scraps. It was just a whole bunch of different stuff. Obviously there was Gemsquash and butternut seeds in there, but God, really, there was like potato peel, you know, scrap. Just random kitchen scraps from preparing food and all that. I eventually started seeing these little sprouts of, I didn't know what they were initially. So thinking, you know what, let me make I don't know what they were, let me see what it is, let them grow up. And eventually I sort of found out, oh no, these are butternuts. And then as they grew larger, then there was a bit of a distinction between all the foliage. So here you can't really see any Gemsquash at the moment. You can see butternut, but you can see this like very specific leaf pattern. So with Gemsquash, it's more of almost like a snowflake pattern, where you have these sort of main leaves coming through, and then each of them, they have these sort of segments coming out instead of this main like flat leaf here. So it's a very, very distinctive, but only once everything started maturing a little bit. So yeah, I basically let everything grow out. While everything was still small, like I said, I didn't really know what everything was. I sort of just moved everything around. In terms of spacing, the first season I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. Everything was way too close to each other. I think I moved everything like 300 mils towards each other, not really knowing how it's gonna grow. I was expecting like a small little bush. So yeah, I basically put them all around here and let everything grow out. So with Gemsquash grows similar to butternut, almost like a vine, but it's not entirely like a vine. You can see this butternut here, how it literally has a single vine that goes through, and then all the leaves, the tendrils, they come from there, and then obviously the fruit themselves form from here. Now they do have sort of these intersections. Gemsquash, on the other hand, what they do is they also have a main leader, but they have more offshoots. The leader grows much shorter, it grows much bushier. It's not as flimsy as a butternut vine, but because of the total mass of the Gemsquash, they tend to be quite heavy, and that's really the challenge with it. So what ended up happening, everything just sort of vined out, you know, bushed out in a form, and yeah, that's pretty much what I did. And it all grew pretty nicely. The first year's harvest was pretty good. I never weighed anything, so I'm not really sure how much we got. And in terms of the amount of plants, yeah, I've got no idea. There's quite a few that did not produce fruit at all, despite the fact that I've got, in this current season, I have like butternuts in my tree. And 2023, the first season when I grew butternuts and Gemsquash, a lot of the stuff around this corner actually did not produce fruit. Now, I don't know if that's just because of its lack of nutrients, or potentially because it was the first season where we actually grew stuff here. Maybe the soil just wasn't the right conditions. So I had quite a few fruiting plants on this side, quite a lot of non-fruiting plants on this side. Seeing how many fruit I have this year in this corner, I can't say that it's specifically the sun requirements that was maybe insufficient. With Gemsquash, you sort of want them to grow, it's almost like a cricket ball size. My aunt has said that you can harvest them nice and small. The idea is then you harvest them nice and small, and they're almost like a baby marrow. You know, you cut them up, roast them, gooi them in a potjie or something like that. So yeah, that's something that I wanted to try this season. But I got, unfortunately, I got a lot of big boys that we're enjoying. In terms of this season, sort of the same thing happened, like I said, where again I buried a whole ton of scraps in preparation to plant stuff here, and then a few weeks later I started seeing everything come up. I did not want to plant squash here. The main reason is because of just crop turnover per area. So the idea was, I grew squash last season, so this season I'm going to grow something else. Nature decided, you know what, Brie, we're gonna gooi some like a volunteer Gemsquash and now butternuts too, so just enjoy it. I let everything grow out. So what ended up happening is I wasn't able to thin everything out properly. Everything literally just grew, and whoever was the strongest, they survived, and from there all the weaklings, they died out. All the ones that did actually survive, not only did they sort of take over this entire area, but what ended up happening is it was so dense, right? And with all the moisture that we're getting, especially with all the rain in December, what ended up happening is this area became very humid microclimate. So I had a lot of issues with powdery mildew, and in fact you can even see now here on my butternuts, they're also getting a little bit of a few spots here. Not all the leaves, but there's definitely a few leaves. Essentially, like this, you can see this is still like a hunky-dory, no issues. And now we've got some powdery mildew. So with the Gemsquash, I find that they're much more susceptible to powdery mildew. Yeah, so that's just one thing that you want to keep in mind, because everything was not managed. Everything was super close together. I find that this wall, and I had the same issue last season, where everything closer to the wall was more susceptible to powdery mildew. What I suspect is, obviously because of the wall, and even if there is a lot of wind at the time, there's not enough wind flow in that area between the wall and sort of halfway through this arborvitae and the peach tree. Everything on the front side, they're much more open, they're much more exposed, so they tend to get less powdery mildew, but everything closer to the wall, they suffer. So everything tends to die from there. This season, so like I said, I did have a lot of volunteers, especially in that side. The only Gemsquash that I actually physically planted myself, there was about 3 of them, and that was here at the corn. So I planted 2 seeds here in front of the corn and then 1 seed on the side. What I found is this area, right? So this is where we're really getting to sun requirements. That whole area gets full morning sun up till about 1 o'clock. Earlier in the season, it's sort of from 11 o'clock, but later in the season, like now, you can see sort of towards 12 o'clock, even sometimes I think 1 o'clock, I'll just double check that, then it starts getting shaded out. So that's at least like 6-7 plus hours of sun that everything gets. This area, however, is full morning sun, and then it only really gets shaded out sort of like 2-3 o'clock, and that's even early on in the growing season. Late on in the growing season, obviously the sun sets later, so it gets more afternoon sun, a lot of hot afternoon sun. But also because of where the sun comes through from here, the mornings as well, they start getting sun through, I don't know, like now probably like 5 o'clock already they're in the sun. So this area really gets like 8-10 hours of sun, especially sort of mid and late season. Now, why am I mentioning this? I did not find a difference in production or health of the plants from here as opposed to that little initial squash corner there. They still got taken over by powdery mildew. Even these two dudes that was on the front here, they still got powdery mildew. They still yielded pretty much the same amount as that initial squash corner over there. In total, here in the backyard, I had 3 squash plants here, butternuts specifically. And this area was, by the end of it, everything that had survived and produced fruit in this area was about 6 plants, Gemsquash plants themselves. It was about 6, so 6 and then 3 there. I found on average, each plant yielded between 6 and 8 Gemsquash. Often some of those were like very, very small, which is basically just what had not been pollinated or had been freshly pollinated. But because of the powdery mildew, they were not very gesond, so I had to take them out. Between there and their sun requirements, as long as they're getting about 6-7 hours of sun every day, it's fine. They can withstand some hot afternoon sun, but you don't really want them to suffer too long in hot afternoon sun. Okay, now for the front yard. This was quite interesting. So the same thing happened. I got another gift from nature. What happened is I transplanted this bush sort of late winter, the 3rd week of August, because that's when everything really started heating up and it was really already too late. But yeah, I had to do that. And then when I did that, I buried a whole ton of scraps. And then once again, I had a lot of volunteer plants come up, but this time they were only Gemsquash. So initially I could not see, we did not really know what they were, again, until they were sort of matured and we can see the leaf patterns. But I initially thought that there were only 2 plants here. It was a little bit cramped and crowded, but I suspect there were actually 3, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But this little corner, I used this as a bit of an experiment. Nature gave me some Gemsquash, so I said to myself, you know what, dude, I'm not going to water this corner, I'm not going to mulch it, or I'm not going to compost this corner or put anything else here. So the Gemsquash that grew here, the 2 or 3 plants that grew here and produced fruit, I did not put compost, no fertilizer, I did not water at all. They grew here. They were super stoked to be in this corner. This corner gets about 5-6 hours of sun per day. It's got 2 walls on the side, so especially at the back there, it's a very coolish microclimate. But funnily enough, I don't think it's really too humid, despite all the rain that we had in December. Now, what's super interesting to note here, despite the lack of human input, these 2 or 3 plants gave me 30 Gemsquash, fully formed, and there were quite a few small ones. I think this area had the most amount of small ones by the time powdery mildew took over. 5, 6, maybe 7 small dudes that I had. Otherwise, the rest of the 30, they were fully formed, they were mature, ready to chow down. And that's what's so interesting about it. So in the backyard, on average between the plants, it's between 6 and 8 Gemsquash. Here, if I'm assuming that there were actually 3, I definitely know there were 2. It just seems too good to be true, so I'm saying there's maybe 3. That then puts it all the way up to like 10 Gemsquash per plant, despite that there was no compost, no fertilizer, no human intervention, no watering myself. It was really just the moisture that was already in the soil and all the rain we had. December was so admittedly a very wet month. That's just such an interesting note, because this whole injury of mine really taught me how little maintenance, how little effort we actually need to put into the garden to yield something. So this whole little experiment of mine that I did was really cool, because it sort of teaches you, saying, listen, sometimes we do too much without much benefit. If something grows there, it's going to grow there, it's going to do well, and it'll do what it needs to, what nature does best. But if you put something in the wrong spot and you have to constantly monitor and do something and help it along, it means the plant is struggling. It's not stoked to be there. It's not going to perform its best. If here, like I said, from scratch, scraps, they grew, they matured, they produced fruit, nothing from our side required. Fantastic place. So this area here, a little bit cooler than everything else. It's a full morning sun. Now it's already 12 o'clock and you can start to see there's already a bit of shade that's coming. This area really gets about 5 hours of sun, also with early morning shade that gets cast from the house. What I wanted to do is grow vertically, and with the injury initially I wasn't able to do anything. I had someone help me later on in the season to just put some of these pellets here, and you can see how nasty the butternut comes through. They're pretty stoked about this. But I tried the same thing with Gemsquash. Because the Gemsquash, they don't actually have these tendrils, so they need a little bit of assistance. So what I did is I basically rested them like in the corner here. They would grow up and the fruit would form, and the ones that I was able to sort of catch early on, sort of again angle it here so it could come through by its own self, and then you just have to help it along through here. I did find it worked quite effectively. So yeah, so that's basically everything that I've done. Now just going forward with some of the issues that I had, specifically with powdery mildew, the growth habit, you know, not being trellised or anything. But what I want to do is, as I plant them up, I actually want to stake them. So because the Gemsquash, if I recall, they grow to around about meter and a half, whereas like butternut, man, they grew, I've got a few that's like 3-4 meters long. That's freaking crazy. But the Gemsquash, they don't get so large, fortunately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant up the seeds. I'll plant a stake there, and as they start coming up, I'm going to tie them to that stake so they can grow vertically instead of just sprawling across the ground. The whole idea with that is to free up some of the space on the ground, try and get some more airflow to the plant to help delay the onset of powdery mildew. It also makes it a lot easier to see what's going on in terms of what's growing and is any pests and stuff. I don't really have too many issues with pests, fortunately, with the squash. It's really it's really just powdery mildew that's the big problem. And then in terms of spacing, so I want to try maybe 500 by 500 spacing. So what is that, like a quarter of a meter squared per plant. I think that'll be fine, because 300 mils, you know, a square foot, that's way too small. They really get taken over. I think even if I grow them vertically, I think planting them in like a 300 by 300 block, I think that's just a little bit too small. So yeah, I'm gonna try 500 by 500, maybe 400 by 400. Maybe I'll think about that. But yeah, so basically plant them up, stake them, get them to grow vertically, and that should be quite lekker. Now also one thing that I didn't really mention before is the ones that I did plant myself there by the corn, I pre-soaked the seeds. I soaked them same as the corn. It was for the whole morning. So with germination time, because I haven't actually planted any other Gemsquash seeds myself, I can't really say that it was a faster germination time. But what I will say is that I planted 3 seeds, I got 3 plants, so that's 100% germination rate. But that could also have just been a fluke. So also something to keep in mind. But what I will also say is that by soaking the seeds, you hydrate them a little bit faster. So if you think about it, everything should be a little bit faster in terms of germination time. Yeah, so that's what I've done. Those are some of the challenges I've faced. Alright, so one thing that I just wanted to add in, right? Just to sort of further illustrate what my yield was for this crop. Apart from the initial volunteers that came up, the plants that I initially sowed the seeds at the corn, that was on the 7th of October. And there was a total of 3 plants. Now my first harvest overall was on the 26th of December. The initial volunteers, they sort of came up in September. So by harvesting already on the 26th of December, and this was that first squash patch that I showed you guys, and then with one at the corn, that's 4 months, including germination time and all that sort of stuff. But my yield for that initial harvest, it was a total of 41 plants, or 7.5 kilograms. The last 2 plants that was at the corn that was planted on the 7th of October, they came up 12th of Jan, 3.5 months. And because there were only 2 plants, there was only 16 Gemsquash total, but it's just under 3 kgs. And then the final plants, which was actually in the front yard, are harvested on the 18th of Jan. These were also volunteers from scraps that was buried in the sort of 3rd week of August. If you consider that, then this is like 5 months. But again, that's just including germination time. It is also a little bit more shaded, but in terms of crop yield, this was just amazing. So this was a total of 30 Gemsquash, 5.5 kgs. And like I said, I saw 2 plants originally. It's too good to be true, so I think it's closer to that. There were maybe 3 plants. But even then, that still goes from like 8 and from 6 to 8 to then like 10 fruit per plant, which is phenomenal considering how little I actually did to those plants in the front. And in total, it's 87 Gemsquashes and just under 16 kilograms worth of food. That's quite a bit. I mean, half of it we've given away to family. This is crazy, and that's essentially from 3-4 months worth of growing. So if you have a good succession going and you plant again sort of early Jan, then you're harvesting at the end of March, and you can easily make those 30 kgs of food for a single season. The Gemsquash themselves, they last, if cured and stored correctly, they can last you sort of 2 months, maybe 3 months. I haven't really tested 3 months. They don't normally last that long, but definitely I think 2 months is achievable if you store them in a cool, dark area. So I just wanted to show you guys my little spreadsheet and exactly what the numbers were for the yield. So yeah, so that's the video. But so overall Gemsquash, pretty easy thing to grow. I've been quite fortunate that most of the stuff has grown from scraps. It's a nice small fruit. It's a nice tasting fruit. I just tend to boil them or steam them, take the pips out, and just chow it like that with a teaspoon directly out of the shell. I'm going to call it a shell because it's a pretty hard peel. One thing that I do want to try is actually roasting them when they're quite small, maybe not necessarily unpollinated, but when they're very young, almost like a summer squash. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully if you guys are busy trying to grow Gemsquash or have tried to and failed, hopefully it was interesting, helpful. I don't know, bro, you tell me. Yeah, lekker man.